Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's teaching, we're going to be discussing the anatomy of the kidneys, and the kidneys are two bean-shaped organs that are reddish brown in color, and they are situated in the posterior abdominal wall. So they are bean-shaped, somewhat reddish brown, and they are situated in the posterior abdominal wall. Now they are 11 centimeter long, 6 centimeter wide, and 3 centimeter thick, and on an average in male, about 150 gram and about 135 gram in female. Now, it is also worthy of note to note that the kidneys are paired. That means we have one on the right and one on the left, but the right kidney is slightly lower because of the position of the liver. Now, let's go to the functions of the kidneys. What are their functions? They are involved in the filtration of blood. They are also involved in excretion of waste. They are involved in electrolytes balance, also involved in acid-base balance. Also, they are well involved in blood pressure regulation and also in the activation of vitamin D. Now, the kidneys have two poles, two borders, and two surfaces. Once again, two poles, two borders, and two surfaces. Now, the poles are the superior pole and the inferior pole. Now, if you check this diagram, you can see the labeling. This part is the superior pole, and this part is the inferior pole. So they have two poles. It's the superior pole, and this is the inferior pole. Now, they have two borders, the medial border and the lateral border. Now, this is the medial border, and this medial border has what we call the hilum. So it has a medial border and it has a lateral border. So let's go to the external features of the kidney, the external features. Number one thing we'll be discussing is the capsule. Now, the capsule is that fibrous covering that covers the entirety of the kidney. And the second external feature we'll be discussing is the renal pelvis. Now, the renal pelvis is that structure that collects urine and is continuous as the ureter. Now, here is the renal pelvis. The structure here, labeled here, is the renal pelvis. So it's this structure that continues as the ureter that collects urine and transport them into the bladder. Now, the renal hilum is a concave area. This aspect, a concave area on the kidney's medial side, where you can find the renal vein, renal artery, and renal pelvis. So once again, we have two poles, we have two borders, and we have what? Two surfaces. The poles are superior pole and inferior pole. The superior pole, it is thick and round. And this inferior pole is somewhat thin and pointed. It has two borders and two surfaces. Now, the borders are medial border and lateral border. Here is the medial border, the other side is the lateral border. So in this medial border, this concave area, you can find the concave area here, where you find the renal vein, renal artery, and the renal pelvis. Now, it's also worthy of note to note that the arrangement of the contents in the renal hilum from anterior to posterior is what we call the VAP, the renal vein, the renal artery, and the renal pelvis. So back to the external features, we said the capsule is a fibrous covering that covers the kidney. So you have the renal pelvis, which is that structure that collects urine and continues as this ureter here. Then so you have the renal hilum, which is that concave area on the kidney's medial side, where you can find the VAP. Now, on a longitudinal section, you'd see these structures in the kidney. The structures in the kidney, and they'll be labeled. So here is the cortex, has an outer cortex and an inner medulla. So this is the cortex, this is the medulla. I will call the renal papillae. We have the minor calyces, the major calyces, and the renal pelvis. Now, the contents of this longitudinal section will be discussed in a further class, maybe kidney 2. Now, let's go to coverings of the kidneys. We have number one, the fibrous capsule. We have the perirenal fats, the renal fascia, and the parenal fats. So let's look at this diagram to better understand this. So here is the fibrous capsule. Fibrous capsule is also known as the true capsule. We also have the perirenal fats. Now, this fibrous capsule is the innermost layer, and it is thin. It is thin and has a tough membrane. This fibrous capsule. it is the innermost layer, also known as the fibrous capsule. So also known as the true capsule rather. It is the innermost layer, it is thin and has a tough membrane. We have the second layer, which is another covering of the kidney. The first covering is the fibrous capsule. Second covering is the perirenal fat, and this is the layer of fat that surrounds the kidney. And this perirenal fat acts as cushion. So the first one is the fibrous capsule, the innermost layer, sustained and has a tough membrane. The second covering we'll be discussing is the perirenal fat. This is the layer of fat surrounding the kidneys and also acts as cushion. Now, the third covering we'll be discussing is the renal fascia. And this renal fascia is a tough fibrous membrane and encloses this kidney together with the perirenal fats also. So it encloses the kidney and perirenal fats together. This renal fascia encloses the kidney and the perirenal fats together. So the last covering we'll be discussing is the perirenal fat. Now, this perirenal fat is the outermost or the outer layer of the fat, and it is not directly attached to the kidney. It is not directly attached to the kidney. So let's move straight to the blood supply. And I'll be running you through the workflow from the renal artery, segmental artery, interlobar artery, the arcuate artery, interlobular artery, and the afferent arteriole. We'll still discuss this in the next class. So the nerve supply is by the renal plexus, by the sympathetic supply origin also, which is a T10 to R1, and this is responsible for the vasoconstriction, for renal blood flow, and for urine output. Now the third nerve supply is the vagus nerve. Now the contents of this longitudinal section, the blood supply and the clinical anatomy, will be further explained in the next class. But for the purpose of this class, the clinical anatomy I'm mentioning, there are kidney stones, we have the acute kidney injury, polycystic kidney disease, and renal hypertension. So I believe that with this, you understand the basics of the kidney anatomy, and that if you have any questions, you can drop them in the comment section. So thank you so much, and see you next class.